For the sermon this morning, I want to share two readings with you, two passages composed by two women who, like me, have been inspired by the movement I am here today to represent and speak on behalf of, a movement called Green Burial. The first is a poem titled My Wish, composed by Barbara Acker after she had visited Foxfield Nature Preserve, a green burial sanctuary in northwest Ohio. "This is my wish," she wrote. "Lay me under the forest floor. Let lost leaves cover me and chipmunks be my guardians. Let summer trees whisper lullabies and wild violets be my memorial. In this place let me rest. Let the rain percolate and release my flesh, and wild violets be my memorial. Allow me to repay all that was taken. Do not encumber me with chemicals, concrete, or coffin. Let my organic self restore and my spiritual self rejoice, for nature has inspired me to reside in its glory. This is my wish." The second reading is by my friend and colleague, the Reverend Meg Barnhouse, minister of our large UU Church in Austin, Texas, and formerly the minister at the UU Church in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Many of you may know Meg as a radio personality, an essayist, and an author of many popular Unitarian Universalist books and meditation manuals, including Waking Up the Karma Fairy, Broken Buddha, and my favorite, Radio Free Bubba. Meg writes, "Once, at a camping weekend with friends, I wandered off to the hammock and lay there looking up at the sky through early April leaves. I was soaked with light, the blue of the sky, the green of the young leaves, and the sun shining through them like stained glass. And I thought to myself, when I die, I want to have my ashes buried under this tree, so that for one spring after another, my body can be part of this particular green. I could feel my life flowing through the cells of a leaf. I could feel the leaf opening to the warmth and light. Feel myself part of that green, and I was happy. If that is my afterlife, I will be deeply happy." Here's the thing. The hope of that kind of afterlife doesn't require any great leap of faith. I know it can happen. My body can be soaked up through the roots of that tree. A part of my body will be unfurling, green in the sun. The green of a new leaf, lit from behind with the spring sun, that color stays inside me even now, a glowing place of peace, the certainty of remaining part of life. Even now, whenever I perform a memorial service, I still see that green. I feel that peace. It's hard to preach a color, but I'm going to think of a way. Today, my friends, like Meg Barnhouse, I am going to preach a color, green, green burial. Let me start by referring back to the song and the video that you enjoyed earlier in the service. "Fall Down as the Rain" by Joe Crookston has indeed become something of a green burial anthem. At the first full-body burial we held at Heritage Acres Memorial Sanctuary, the green burial ground I manage here in Cincinnati, Ohio, the family asked that "Fall Down as the Rain" be played. As I looked around the circle of loved ones who had gathered there to pay their respects to a man younger than me who had died from COVID, there were plenty of tears. There were plenty of smiles. And there were heads nodding in acknowledgement of the simple but powerful celebration in that song of the natural cycle of life and death and new life, a cycle each of us is part of. Water, rain, soil, plant, the interconnected web of existence. Each unique manifestation of the spirit of life has a role to play in that eternal circle. Meg Barnhouse told us that she wants to be buried under this tree, so that for one spring after another, my body can be part of this particular green. Yet there are those who prefer to think of themselves as separate from nature. They tend to believe that nature is something out there rather than something in here. I think most of us Unitarian Universalists would beg to differ. Certainly in the contemporary UU expressions of a Meg Barnhouse or a Joe Crookston, but also going back as far as our transcendentalist UU ancestors. Our faith tradition recognizes that the out there and the in here are the same thing. Two parts of one great whole, one great mystery that is the grand and beautiful natural cycle, eternally ebbing and flowing, circling back and forth from birth to death to renewal. I would even go so far as to say that somewhere deep inside we all know that. Each human being knows this to be true. We sense that we are connected to one another and to something much bigger. Yet day to day we tend to live distracted and disconnected, and too often in denial of the inconvenient truth that our dance here in this life is quite brief, and our passing from it is both guaranteed and actually quite necessary in order to continue that endlessly recurring cycle: birth, death, renewal. The great circle of life that our society, our modern American culture tries hard, oh so very hard, to have us ignore, to separate us from. And so I come to you this morning to say, look well, therefore, to this day, and to advocate for a process that I believe can profoundly and quite naturally reconnect us to that cycle of birth, death, and renewal, a process known as green burial. Green burial is actually a very simple idea, an idea as old as humanity itself. When a person dies, when a loved one dies, when we die, the community gathers. A simple hole is dug in the ground, and that person's remains are returned naturally to the earth, which was their source. There are no chemicals involved. There's no metal or concrete, no marble or mausoleums. Just a human being, reverently placed in sacred ground, that they might naturally become part of the earth once again. Earlier we heard the final wishes of two modern American women. Now let us listen to these poetic final instructions written by the beloved poet Khalil Gibran about his own final wish for his body at the time of his death. "Dig my grave," he wrote, "where violets and poppies grow. Take me from all earthly raiment and place me deep in my mother, covering me with soft earth, and let each handful be mixed with seeds of jasmine, lilies, and myrtle. And when they grow above me and thrive on my body's element, they will breathe the fragrance of my heart out into space and reveal, even to the sun itself, the secret of my deep peace." Now contrast these words and the images they evoke for you with most, if not all, of the funerals that you have ever attended, with most, if not all, of the cemeteries you have ever visited. Contrast those images in your mind, and you will perhaps begin to understand what has motivated me, as an important part of my Unitarian Universalist ministry, to create a natural burial ground, a place much more akin to the final resting place Gibran describes, and to create it right here in Cincinnati, where I live. To tell you the story of Heritage Acres Memorial Sanctuary, not only this city's but this region's first and only dedicated green burial preserve, created by and out of the UU Church I serve. To tell you our story, let me go back many years to an afternoon that changed not only my life, but literally my death. It was not long after I, an only child, had buried my father in the manner common to us today in America. One fall afternoon I found myself standing on a hill overlooking the still quaint town of Concord, Massachusetts, on a pilgrimage to the grave of Henry David Thoreau, whom many consider the father of the American environmental movement. Standing there, I noticed the difference between that grave and my father's grave. Talk about contrasting images. Dad's recently machine-dug grave was marked by a brass military memorial, a marble stone, and was being occasionally replenished by complete strangers with plastic flowers in a plastic vase. All of this was and still is surrounded by preternaturally green, heavily manicured, herbicide and pesticide-sprayed grass that looks vaguely like a lost section of a golf course. Underneath his grave marker, of course, is a concrete vault containing a metal casket and an embalmed body, my father's body. What I found and felt that crisp fall afternoon at Henry David Thoreau's grave, however, was very different. The ground there was not at all smooth and level. His simple stone marker, about the size of our hymnal, had one fading word on it: Henry. There were roots and bushes, pine needles and leaves everywhere. There was even a pine tree growing right out of his grave. A pine tree literally growing from the ground where the world's most well-known and beloved naturalist is buried. I was struck by the thought that all those years ago, Thoreau and each of his contemporaries, all of his companions in that cemetery, including Emerson, Hawthorne, the Alcotts, all had been buried in a simple, handmade wooden casket, had been dressed in simple, natural, organic cotton clothes, and had long since returned to the earth naturally, to become the earth once again. Standing there that afternoon, with the sun softly slanting through the trees, I began to daydream, much as Thoreau himself had done in his lifetime, about the wonder and beauty of nature, about that cycle of which we are a part, birth and death and renewal. And I soon found myself imagining, with sound scientific evidence on my side, that some of Thoreau himself was now part of that pine tree which was growing from his grave. That there were particles, atoms and molecules from one of my literary and spiritual heroes in that tree, in that living, breathing, photosynthesis performing, oxygen producing tree. And I myself was right there, breathing that air in that moment, on that day. It was a moment of pure clarity. I inhaled deeply. I felt I was absorbing the fall breeze, bathing in the experience, the religious experience that I was having. I recalled those lines in our hymnal which remind us that we are stardust. I heard in my head the ancient, timeless words that I pronounce at funerals and memorial services: ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And I was comforted beyond words to rest and to be held in that eternal connection. I bent down and picked up a pine cone from Henry David Thoreau's grave. This pine cone. I still get goosebumps every time I hold this pine cone. I'm amazed, to quote UU Minister Robert Weston, and almost mute with awe, to think that at the atomic level, in the very chemical composition of this little pine cone, is something of Henry David Thoreau himself, living on, just in a different form. Fall down as the rain, indeed. That afternoon and that experience at that historic grave planted a seed, pun very much intended, planted a seed in my heart and in my mind, a seed that ultimately became Heritage Acres Memorial Sanctuary. I started doing research about green burial. What I discovered both inspired me and horrified me. The inspiring part is simple enough. Green burial heals our broken relationship with death and with nature. Green burial is a profoundly spiritual act, the act of a community caring for its own dead and returning its loved ones with loving hands and hearts, with honor and respect, to the embrace of Mother Earth. Green burial literally nurtures new and renewing life, feeds and fuels growth, allows us to become part and parcel of the ongoing spirit of life. So when people ask me, as they sometimes do, why green burial, I never leave out the spiritual aspect, the natural aspect of the equation. But of course, there's also an ecological side to the equation. Environmentally speaking, the way we have come to bury our dead in America is nothing short of horrific. It is appalling, and it is so unnecessary. Here I will simply offer you a few statistics. Each year in the United States alone, and friends, we are almost completely alone in our world in this pursuit of these terrible practices. Each year in the United States, we put into the ground, we bury willingly, along with our beloved dead, 64,000 tons of steel, 1.6 million tons of concrete, and 4.3 million gallons of toxic, carcinogenic, embalming fluid. That's every year in this country. Green burial is a process, a traditional and natural process, and a movement that refuses to participate in this environmental nightmare. As we put it, there are 3 no's in green burial. No embalming, no metal caskets, no concrete vaults. And there's just one important yes. Everything that goes into the ground should be biodegradable. It's that simple. Everything we put into Mother Earth can be used again by Mother Earth, including us, including this body. So after learning all this, what could I do? After discovering the environmental disaster that is the modern American way of burial, what could I do? After witnessing the spiritual deepening and community empowerment that come with a green burial, after experiencing all of this, of course, I had to share this news with my congregation, right? Well, somewhat to my surprise and much to my delight, the seeds that had taken root in me that afternoon at Thoreau's grave also began to take root in many of them. Folks were disappointed to discover that there was not a single green burial sanctuary within 150 miles of Cincinnati, and they resolved to do something about it. Maybe, just maybe, we, a little Unitarian Universalist church in the suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio, could start a green burial ground. Not only for ourselves, not only for the community, but for the entire region. And that's exactly what we did. Heritage Acres Memorial Sanctuary opened without fanfare thanks to the pandemic a year ago on Earth Day. So far we've had a dozen burials, 2/3 of which are the cremated ashes of people ranging in age from 29 to 80. In the meadow, in the woods, under a tree like Meg Barnhouse envisions, we've done these burials. We've been featured in the Cincinnati newspaper and on local TV. We've had a full-color feature article on us in Cincinnati Magazine in their annual Best of Cincinnati edition. We've been certified by the Green Burial Council and have given presentations at green burial conferences, hospice organizations, and more. But of course, we are in Ohio. You are in North Carolina. There are other green burial grounds, in fact 2 of my favorite green burial grounds in the whole country, not that far from you. There's the lovely Carolina Memorial Sanctuary just south of Asheville, And there's Ramsey Creek Preserve, the very first natural burial nature preserve in the country, not that far from Clemson, South Carolina. Maybe someday there will be one in the Charlotte metro area as well. Green burial is growing by leaps and bounds. One recent study conducted by the National Funeral Directors Alliance, no less, indicated that 54% of Americans are considering green burial, and nearly 3/4 of all U.S. cemeteries report having been asked for a green burial option. The vast majority of them do not have such an option. Let me close my reflection today by sharing with you a poem written by the late Anne Alexander Bingham, who is remembered as a mother, grandmother, ecologist, school teacher, midwife, and, like me, passionate advocate for green burial. This poem is titled, "It Is Enough." It is enough to know that the atoms of my body will remain, to think of them rising through the roots of a great oak, to live in leaves and branches and twigs, perhaps to feed the crimson peony, the blue iris, or the broccoli, or to rest on the water, freeze and thaw with the seasons. Some of my atoms might become a bit of fluff on the wing of a bird, to feel the breeze, to know the support of air. Some might drift even higher up into space, stardust, returning from whence it came. It is enough. It is enough to know that as long as there is a universe, I will be a part of it. May it be so, my friends. May it be so, and amen.